Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm back on the Command Journey podcast. I have a special guest with us this afternoon. So I want you all to meet our guest, as you always do, in the way that the Command Journey podcast likes to do, which is let them introduce themselves. So, guest, tell us who you are.
So my name is Pierre Bourgiex. I'm the founder and CEO of ESI Convergent, Gent. I always have to make sure of that. We started our business in 2017, but I've been in the industry for 30 some odd years. Started the RAND Corporation, State Department of Security Services, focused on technology, communication systems, NAVCOM, SATCOM, worked with Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas, a lot of those wonderful people before 9/11. And then after 9/11, everything changed for everyone from the standpoint of security. So got very involved in the physical controls world, physical barrier world, physical perimeter world within the government, did forward-based assessments and did work with integrators. When I got back into the private sector and helped companies, ADT on the banking side, and in terms of gaining positioning in the marketplace and understanding how technology affected, the business itself. And that was something that I really honed in on. Then I went into IT and cybersecurity, realizing there was a big gap from the standpoint of the physical security world, and realized, I didn't know what I didn't know, and started getting into depth in terms of cyber and IT. Crossed that threshold, bought into a company called Secure State. I was there for a period of time, built a physical practice at Secure State, and then when it was sold, started ESI Convergent with the ENT. Long and the short of it, been around the business a while, and we have 4 pillars to the ESI Convergent world. One of the pillars is manufacturer consulting, which we've done for many, many companies. So from the largest companies in the world, such as Hitachi, all the way to startups. We've helped them from the standpoint of positioning and configuring and aligning technology into the market space and really getting that pull and push into that space across the globe. And one of the things we also do, which is really interesting and unique, is the fact that we have an enterprise consulting practice as well. So we deal with end users as large as the largest financial institutions to energy companies as well. So we have crossed many different arenas. We understand virtually all the verticals. Our team members are SMEs, experts in the fields that they are in. They understand not only technology, which we obviously is a threshold for acceptance into our organization, is you really have to be technological savvy, and you have to understand not only really the physical domain, but really at the end of the day, you have to understand the IT domain. So, we're a lot of people that had a lot of experience in a variety of different environments. We transcend from the commercial space, the enterprise space, the .gov, .mil space. So we work within government and municipalities and understand that world as well. And then our third leg or third pillar, as they might say, is we do cyber and IT services, and that can go from governance to OT practice, et cetera, which is pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we do to help support that world. We've got experts in that arena. We just picked up 3 of the most brilliant minds who are about to set up a new practice. And that's going to be OTICS, which is, the industrial controls side of the industry and IT. So there are 3 that are going to be really focused uber on that world. And then finally, it's lab services, testing. We evaluate technology, we test it, we put a maturity rating on the technology itself, and we align it to scenarios and try to test it against the networks that they have. So it's a lot, but really at the end of the day, it runs smoothly because we've got 4 pillars to a very growing practice. I always say that, what's the difference between a doctor's practice and a consultant's practice? Well, not much. We just don't know how to cut people. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. I think you touched on something that I'd like to circle back to really quick. It sort of leads me into the next question, which is for our audience in the security industry who maybe are not as familiar with something like scenario-based testing, what's ESI Convergent's approach to scenario-based testing?
Well, I think from the standpoint of first, we take a converged approach to everything. So we understand that, IT, OT, physical security, IoT, all of this really is converged from policy, procedure, technology, and people perspective. Now, what that means to any organization is when we do scenario based testing, we evaluate technology to see how it ties to business risk. We immediately define kind of how that technology could inevitably either be a burden or could help the process of business. Why? People go, well, it's security. How can it be? It's usually a cost center. I say yes, but unfortunately, in the world that we live in today, it's no longer as much a cost center, but it's also a way to detract or deter liability. And that in and of itself is a great piece to the puzzle because I look at the world this way, right? So take an hourglass. You can picture the hourglass. On the bottom of the hourglass is infrastructure. Okay. Now that bottom hourglass is security, right? So you have the hourglass. The very bottom is infrastructure. That whole bottom is security. The top is risk. Okay. So what is the challenge? Well, for many years, almost 20 years, the biggest challenge is every time something took place, we would detect a threat and vulnerability. And you know when that happened? When a human being interacted with infrastructure. Now, that infrastructure is not just security technology. It's IT, it's physical security, it's operational technology, it's any device that basically is the foundation of your enterprise and your business. Because at the end of the day, that's where we try to secure it first, right? We try to ensure that the threats and vulnerabilities don't come into play with our business. So what we weren't doing for so many years is we weren't tying that threat and vulnerability to that business risk at the top. We weren't correlating that. And what we do at ESI is we really look at that from the standpoint of when we test systems, we take the scenario and the outcome. And the outcome is critical because we have to know what is your intent? Why do I care? And why am I doing this? I'm not just putting in 1,000 cameras, but why am I doing it? And what is it supposed to do to support your business and or to protect your business, right? So when we do that, immediately we start defining, in effect, your acceptable level of risk, and we start understanding what is required and what is not required. So we take it from a much deeper level than just simply saying, look, we're going to test your technology, but without true understanding of their network infrastructure, because what we do is we'll replicate your network infrastructure in our domain and test the technology against that. To me, scenario-based testing lives in that world. And to do it right, you have to get close to the proximity of what the end user is requiring. That's where the end user typically has in the past tested themselves. Inevitably, they're trying to get out of that routine because reality is it's costing them money. Because at the end of the day, for them, what's their business? If you're a bank, you're doing banking. You're not doing security testing. So I think what we have done, in effect, is looked at scenario-based testing in a different way to really validate not only the technology, but also validate how it's used in network infrastructure that it's used under, if it's cloud-based, if it's on-prem, if it's understanding your cloud architecture versus how it's going to be used. What does the segmentation look like? How do you protect yourself? So IT looks at you and goes, wow, man, you did half my work. I don't have to worry about this anymore. You've done the due diligence. You've attained a level of responsibility in terms of deploying my technology. So scenario-based testing is a really critical piece of really defining product technology to market.
Yeah, it's a fantastic answer. So I guess the follow-up to that is, can you give me, perhaps with the serial number scratched off, an example of where you've done it?
So we've done it with utility companies, right? So we would evaluate a technology by reestablishing, the network environment in our own domain, basically not connected to theirs. We replicate exactly the scenario they're going to be using the technology, be it at a substation or be it at a control center, right? So if you're in a control center, a little bit different application than a substation, which would be outside the perimeter of the domain of the control system. So if you have a control system, right, and you're controlling a lot of things, you want to make sure that that technology is going to apply well and was not, and with the processes. So I'll give you an example. If there's a technology you're deploying that if it senses a system going bad or something taking place, it doesn't just shut off everything. You have to go through a process. So that's where policies and procedures and tying it to the regulated markets, especially, you have to understand their SIP requirements and going, what are the things in terms of default that I have to put into this, or a process of remediation that I need to have that's immediately tied to the technology itself. So it's not as much only defining did it work, right? So I always say, if you brought me to the dance and you tell me all about how beautiful this person is, but by the time you get to the dance, the guy goes, well, she's not showing up. Well, wait a minute. I planned for it. I'm all set up. So normally that's not the case. Normally they show up. And normally they're pretty good technologies that show up. It's not about that. It's about, do they work as according to the outcomes that they've specified? And the client says, I need this to do this. Now I need to create a process that ensures that the technology will give me the right outcomes without sacrificing my business operational infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes good sense to me, right? So it's not just about a situation where you talk about or explain a process. It's something that you put into practice at a micro and macro level.
Correct.
Especially when we're talking about utility companies, you're talking about a lot of moving parts and a lot of areas of exposure and areas of risk. And it could be a cyber risk. It could be a physical risk. Those risks could be one and the same, potentially, with some of our markets too. Or it could be something as simple as, I guess an IT risk is technically a cyber risk, but it could be something as a physical device making it onto the site. So it can come in a lot of different forms, and having a firm that knows all those different forms to help, I guess, lift the burden. Really, that's what you're doing, is you're lifting a burden off of, as you mentioned before, someone's shoulders who maybe, listen, they work in gas, and that's their job. Their job is to safely deliver gas to people, natural gas. It's not to advise and understand how to be agile for every threat that is out there. So, yeah, it's a fantastic thought.
And this is a good point. I'm going to follow up with that conversation, because there are certain areas where, when we talk about OT, we'll talk about SCADA control systems and switches and valves. The reality is that it's not about the valve or the actual system. Is the fact that the system is incapable of being monitored. The chipsets, the solutions that are implemented, must have the ability to then be monitored. And then, once monitored, right, what is the cascading issue that could take place? I call it correlated event tracking. Once you understand what the methodology of event tracking is, and understand that if this happens, then this could happen, and having those scenarios pre-established, which will eliminate potential weaknesses from establishing, not only not knowing the sequence or the situation, but being able to be aware, right, of the consequences. And so before it gets to the point of the consequence, you actually are potentially preventing the act of penetration. And this is exactly where, these type of scenario-based testings will take you down a path to give you much better resilience, right? Much better potential resilience in terms of technology and processes that you're creating.
That's a great point. I guess when you look at cybersecurity, say from a device standpoint, if you're going to come in and work as an advisor to a client that has, let's just say, we can keep it even in the utilities portfolio. We've got a little bit of outdated hardware because the hardware they're used to was built so they thought, as a tank to never be replaced. And oh, surprise, surprise, 25 years has passed. And now that tank is literally dead weight that doesn't do what it needs to do. When you look at those from a hardware standpoint, what's your process for them to say, listen, this unit here or these series of units, it could be 1,000 units. We need to talk about your exposure level or where you need to be as migrating towards the future. How do you approach that?
So we talk about modernization, right? So one of the challenges for most organizations is to really understand what that means. We've moved into a new model, right? And this modernization issue is becoming increasingly problematic in, say, areas like utility or, say, critical infrastructure as a whole. And so if you think about that, right, what does modernization mean? Well, it just simply means this. If your systems are legacy, if you have a system, one system that's legacy, you can sacrifice an entire modernized system and or modernized network. So I can be the most secure network in the world, right? I have done all the right things, check the right check boxes to ensure my security, follow, NIST 800, 171, and 53 validation. I understand zero trust. I am the best. Now, the minute I tie anything that is a legacy system that cannot be modernized, cannot reach a level of modernization that is mature at the same level that the organization from a network perspective is mature, you've got a problem. And so, where this comes to play is that as we modernize systems, right, we have to take into account the cost of the infrastructure itself. Oftentimes, we neglect the obvious. Why? Because the obvious has been done a certain way for so long, we don't assume we need to change it. Hey, what's the old adage? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The unfortunate part to that motto is that no longer with the converged approach of systems today, you can get away with it. Because in the end, if I create a cascading issue that inevitably lands at a switch, and I know if I do this specifically right, I can cause a reaction, which could cause a potential breach. Now, that breach may not affect the network, but it may affect a specific issue or a specific way of monitoring a specific use of a specific pipe. Now, I'm not going to tell you that that's not hasn't happened, but it has, right? So we can talk about colonial, we can talk about all kinds of different issues. Um, and I can tell you that there's a gas company in California that's now been convicted of a crime because of it. So the reality is this: we are on the threshold of some kind of scary things because we don't realize that the lowest common denominator of technology could be our greatest weakness.
That's a pretty salient point, right? One thing I would say, just as commentary back on what you mentioned, it might not be we want to cause a massive cascading problem from the outside. It might be there's this one substation that we want to hit in our area as a political message or whatever we want to term it as. And all we want to do is overload this one router to shut this one computer system down to let them know we can get them. And, whether it be hacktivism or whether it be black hat work in the market, it's out there and companies have to be prepared for it. And so it's good that there's a partner they can get in touch with like ESI that can help walk them through a path to maybe out of the jungle, so to speak.
Absolutely. And that's really what it boils down to, is that picking the right people that really can help define, how to solve these specific issues within, the industry that we live in. And I think that's one of the things I would definitely, hone in on.
So lastly, I'll ask you the $64,000 question, which is, you and I are having this conversation 3 to 5 years now down the line. What do you see, Pierre, that we'll be talking about? Like, man, we didn't see this coming, or we did see this coming. I'm glad we prepared for it. What's the conversation at the center of the table?
So I think what it boils down to is this: we're no longer just simply a product-based industry. Okay, we are a software-based industry. That has been going on, and that's become very relevant. Now, with that in mind, we've also created an unbelievable amount of sensors. Now, I want you to think about that, right? 74 billion connected devices in the world. Now, that didn't happen by accident. It kind of grew on us, right? We started using technology, we started using our phones, we started using our connected devices. So what are connected devices? They're ingestion tools. They're tools for ingestion. However we ingest doesn't matter. It's just a use of ingestion to get to data. Now, we've heard this before, the great big data world, right? Well, guess what? That's something that just has crept onto us because we knew it was there. We didn't understand it. Data scientists were telling us, we're going to use this data. We're going to use this data. Well, you have Intel, you have NVIDIA. They started entering the market with using neural network and creating models that would inevitably become part of this sustainable environment called, we'll just say AI. But the reality is that I call it synthetic cognition, synthetic thought, because frankly, it has nothing to do with artificial intelligence. The reality is that we've created this thought, right? This ability to process information. And with processing of information and the ability to go in through deep learning, machine learning, looking at neural networks to acquire and ingest and use this data, and then to model that data through data lakes, through creating, compute at the edge and power to now validate critical versus non-critical data, and then be able to now use that data to align to specific scenarios, specific models, platforms that could be tied in deep analytics to solve problems, and then using data to validate or give clear information and path to more data, more information, become visible 360 degrees. That, my friend, no one understood was going to happen. I think what it boils down to is that we all been very surprised. We've been surprised by the speed, by the rapidity of what could take place. And I think now we are in a position where, the cat is out of the bag. Now we got to create rules. So this goes back to the whole, antiquated aspect of privacy. Privacy. No one has privacy. So what it comes down to is that how do we put the cat back in the bag while ensuring that we protect privacy and our rights? So this is going to be the biggest challenge facing the world, okay? And this also ties to the variety of different mechanisms of fraud, the variety of mechanisms of manipulation of nation states, of political organizations, of those who are trying to establish a position and knowing that they can manipulate the public to do its bidding. The reality is this is what we're facing right now in wars in the Middle East that, be it that they've been going on forever, they're just another variety. And unfortunately, it's becoming to the point where it's crossing the shores. We are all affected by it one way or the other. So these are the things I think we have to be pondering. I think that it's not as much about trying to constrain our rights as it is to give ourselves the ability to have rights at all.
That's an excellent point to end on. And so I'll just say in closing, thank you, Pierre, from ESI Convergent, and with an E, mind you, for those of you in listening land. You've given us an awful lot to think about. And I want to thank you for coming on the Commend Journey podcast.
Thank you.